So arrow functions were introduced into JavaScript in 2015. They were part of the ES 2015 or ES6 update. And there's some advantages to using arrow functions. Of course, they're more compact. They also have an implicit return, which I'll show you. And they also have a lexical scope, which I'll talk about a little later. So let's start off here by just creating a regular function declaration like we've been doing. So just a simple add function that will return A plus B, and then we'll call that, we'll just do a console log of add and pass in 1, 2. So we get 3. Now let's rewrite this as an arrow function. So I'm going to go right underneath it, and we're going to say const add. And remember, in the last video I showed you we can also create function expressions. So I could do equals function like this. Now, an arrow function, we can actually get rid of the function keyword, and then instead of using the function keyword after the parentheses, we're going to use an arrow, or what we call a fat arrow. And then we can pass in any parameters, and then in the curly braces here, we can just, same thing, just return A plus B. If I save that, we get 3. So this is just the regular arrow function syntax. Now, there are some things we can do to make this even shorter. Since we only have a single expression, just one line expression here that we're returning something, we can shorten this by getting rid of the return statement and the curly braces. So instead of using add, though, I'm going to do subtract, just so I don't have to comment that one out too. But we'll say const subtract, and it takes in A and B. We have our arrow. Now, instead of putting my parentheses here, I'm just going to directly say A minus B. So this is saying I want to return this expression to the right of the arrow. So this is the same as this, of course, except it's subtracting. So I'll go ahead and copy this down, and we'll say 10.5, and we're going to call subtract. And of course, we get 5. So this is it's an implicit return because we're not specifying the return keyword, it's just doing it. So let's say implicit return. Now there's another way that we can shorten things up. If your function only has a single parameter, so let's say we have a function called double, and it takes in a single parameter, and then what we want to return is whatever we pass in, and then just multiply it by 2. So let me just run that down here real quick. So if we do double and pass in 10, we get 20. Now, the way we can make this shorter, just a little shorter, but it's important to know this, is when we have a single parameter like this, we don't need to have parentheses around it. Okay, now the way that I have my text editor set up in Prettier and auto format, if I save, it puts it in automatically. But what I can do is copy this. I'm going to copy it and then comment it out. And then over here in my console, I'll paste it in. And you'll see that that works. So if I do double, let's say double 1, we get 2. Now, if I try to define this and leave off my parentheses, but I have more than one param, that's not going to work. Okay, so you can only emit the parentheses when you have a single param. So let's uncomment these, and I'll just put a comment here, and you can say, can leave off parentheses with a single param. Now, another thing that can cause a little bit of confusion is if you're returning an object. So let's say returning an object, and this is due to the formatting of having the arrow point to curly braces when you want to return an object which also uses curly braces. So to give you an example, let's say const, we'll call this function just create object, and it doesn't have to take anything in, but let's say I want this to return an object that has a name. I'll just do that, and then if I save, you'll see that Prettier automatically thinks to put a semicolon here, which obviously isn't what I want if I'm trying to make this an object. So if I come down here and I do a console log of create object, I'm going to get undefined. So all you need to do is, if you want to return an object this way, you just surround the curly braces with parentheses. And then of course we don't want that semicolon. So now if I save, you can see we're returning an object that has the name of Brad. Now, I know we haven't gone over high order array methods or callbacks or anything, but that's another great place to use arrow functions. So I'm just going to show you an example. So let's say we have an array, we'll just call it numbers, and we'll just do 1 through 5. And on arrays, there's a method called forEach. And we haven't gone over this yet, but we'll be getting deep into these types of methods later on. But just to show you, if we do numbers.forEach, what you pass in here is a function, okay? And you could do it like this. You could just pass in a regular anonymous function and just pass in whatever you want to use for each number. I'll just use a variable called n, and then I'll just do a console log of n. If I save that, you'll see it. Basically what this does is it loops through and it just outputs, logs each number. Okay, I could do whatever I want with this number, but I'm just choosing to log it out. Now this is a good place to use an arrow function because you can really shorten it up and make it neater. So let's say forEach, and instead of passing in the word function, I can just put in my parentheses, pass in, actually in this case I wouldn't even need parentheses since I'm using a single parameter, but it'll add it automatically in my case. And then we have an arrow, and since I just want to do a single console log, I don't even have to use curly braces. I can just say I want to do a console log and save. Like I said, the parentheses get added, but you really don't need them. And you can see it does the same thing. So I think that this is, more neater and shorter and concise than this. But again, it's all preference, just like most things. So this is, let's say, arrow function in a callback. So callback is basically when we pass a function into another function, and we'll get into that later. All right, so hopefully this just gives you a basic understanding of how to format arrow functions. We'll be using them throughout the course. Now in the next video, I want to get into something called immediately invoked functions.